Med Motivation.
Welcome to another episode of the Med Motivation podcast. Today, we are going to go through some basic physiology of memory and learning. Since our podcast is about study tips and motivation, and it's mostly for medical students, I thought why not go through some basic physiology material about memory and learning and how we can apply this into our studying process. Let's just first of all define what learning is, since that's what this whole podcast is based on. The ability to alter behavior on the basis of experience. As humans, we have this ability, and learning is the acquisition of this information that helps us alter our behavior according to the experience. And memory is the ability of storing this information that we have learned. So now that you have a basic understanding of a clear definition of what learning and memory is, I'm sure this will help you guys in your physiology examinations as well. So let's just try to go through the stuff step by step and figure out what it is that we need to change or that we need to apply into our studying that we can take from this. So basically, we are taught that the memory can be classified into different types. So the most basic classification of memory is explicit and implicit. So explicit is declarative memory. You can declare that, okay, I remember this. You can consciously recall this information. Those are explicit memories, such as names, facts. Like if you know someone's name, you can be like, oh yeah, I know that person's name. But if it's an implicit memory, it's a non-declarative memory. It's not dependent on conscious recall. So you can't exactly recall it, and it's not dependent on conscious recall. For example, a Pavlovian reflex, a Russian psychologist named Ivan Pavlov. So this guy was doing experiments on his dog. He used to ring a bell every time he serves food to his dog, and the dog associated that bell sound with the food. So even without the food, even without seeing or hearing or smelling the food, even without seeing or smelling the food, the dog would start salivating when he hears the bell. So the dog has associated the food with the bell due to repeated exposure, and that's what you call a Pavlovian reflex. So that kind of memory, the dog is probably not aware that it's happening to him. It's kind of an implicit memory. It's kind of programmed into the dog. So we also have those kinds of reflex. It's common to all mammals, I guess. Implicit memories are not so much important in this context, since we're trying to learn stuff and be able to actively recall them, because in the exam we're gonna have to. That's the whole point of this. It's not that implicit memories are not important. I'll get to this later, but let's just focus on explicit memories for now. So explicit memories again divide into two different types. We have episodic memories and semantic memories. Episodic memories are like the name kind of suggests what it means as well, kind of like an episode. It's an event that happens. For example, something that happened yesterday, you remember it as an event. Those are episodic memories. You remember like, oh yeah, I forgot to have lunch yesterday, and that's an episodic memory. And those memories are stored in the hippocampus and medial temporal lobe. And the other type is semantic memories. Those are what really concerns us. Those are the memories that we need to focus on, because it's not events that they're gonna ask us in the exam, right? So majority of it is facts, words, rules, anatomy. Those are semantic memories, and those are stored in the temporal cortex and prefrontal cortex. And let's talk about implicit memories for a second. Implicit memories are stuff that we are not aware of, right? They are stored in different areas of the brain, including basal ganglia and cerebellum. And remember, it does not involve the hippocampus, okay? So for example, stuff like walking. You don't consciously think like, okay, this is how I walk, and try to recall it, and then that's not how walking works, right? But it's kind of an implicit memory. You have learned how to walk, but you're doing it unconsciously. Your brain tells you to walk, but it doesn't tell you how to walk. But people with cerebellar disease, they initially cannot walk, but they can learn themselves to walk again. But it never becomes an implicit memory. It never becomes a natural, habitual thing. You have to like consciously think and concentrate really hard on walking when you do that. If I easily distract you, you might lose your balance. That can happen to people with the cerebral disease. So implicit memories, just like implicit memories can again be divided into 4 different types. Procedural memories, priming, associative, and non-associative. So procedural implicit memories are what I talked about earlier, like walking, and other skills like cycling. So procedural memories are skills that have to be learned, but they become automatic after a while. So this can happen in any process that you do in a repetitive manner. For example, factory workers who do the same movement repetitively, it becomes a kind of an automatic reflex after a while. And that is a procedural memory. And these are processed in the striatum. And then we have priming. Priming is very similar to associative memory, the Pavlovian reflex. There is also a debate about whether this kind of memory exists or if it's the same as associative memory, but it basically is helped by a prompt and involves neocortex. And then you have the associative memories, and those are what we talked about earlier, the Pavlovian reflexes involving amygdala and cerebellum. And then you have non-associative memories, learning like habituation, sensitization, and those are dependent on reflex pathways. So those are kind of technical stuff. No need to get into too much detail, as those are not the important ones that we need to know about, since we're talking about study tips and how we can incorporate this into our learning environment. But I think, in my opinion, certain things, even in our exam, let's say we are doing an MCQ paper, there are certain things even in that we need to kind of make a habit out of. For example, it's very common in medicine that we are given true or false questions, and if you give the wrong answer, you get minus marks. And it's expected of the medical students to have a habit of not answering questions that you don't know. So it's different from a lot of other exams that you can just guess an answer and maybe work your luck. You can't do that in medical college exams. So you need to build a habit of, after every question, after every statement, really ask yourself, do I really know this? And I think that has to come out of a habit. And you need to be sort of familiar with doing these papers, and it has to become, in a sense, an implicit memory for you to be able to do the same in the exam, because you'll have to be concentrating on the subject material and what they're really asking in the paper as well, and in a very short time you have to answer it. So I think implicit memories are also just as important. And another thing that I believe is, like, we talked about so many types of memory and how each type is stored in different areas of the brain. I feel like each part of our brain can only handle so much. So I know that our prefrontal cortex and temporal cortex have a significant amount of folds and area than other parts of the brain. So I guess they are much more adapted to handling large amounts of knowledge. But still, I mean, not all our brains are the same. Some of us may be having smaller prefrontal cortexes than bigger hippocampus, I guess. Anyways, the point is, even semantic memories that we have, we can turn them into episodic memories. For example, without entirely depending on our temporal cortex and prefrontal cortex, we can associate semantic memory we have, like, let's say, the arterial tree, the arterial schematic, how the aorta goes and divides into different branches. We can turn it into an episodic memory. For example, another thing is, when you're in a lecture and the lecturer explains the lesson to you with a story. I had a brilliant science teacher back when I was in school, and he used to do this amazing style of teaching, which I've never seen anyone else do before or after. He always, whenever a difficult topic comes up, he always goes like this: okay, children, last night I saw a dream. And then he'd make up an entire story that relates to the topic that he's trying to teach. And it's kind of amazing how he does it. And it doesn't always have to make sense or be a logical plot, because it's a dream and dreams never make sense. But still, that story, it's very entertaining to listen to that. And we make that association with that episodic memory. And that kind of takes the stress off our temporal cortex and prefrontal cortex. And it makes recalling much easier, in my opinion. So I think all those types of memory are important to our learning process, and we can kind of divide up the work between all those parts of the brain so that it goes into our heads easier. And then we're talking about explicit memories, right? Again, guess what? Explicit memories also divide into two types. You have short-term memories and long-term memories. And our goal here as students is to turn those short-term memories into long-term memories. At least that's what is supposed to happen ideally, but some universities, they don't necessarily check our long-term memory. They just teach us a module and then right afterwards they have the exam. So in a sense, they are basically only checking your short-term memory. But if you have a lot of weight put towards your final exams in your university, then I guess they are doing the right thing and checking your long-term memory. I think the long-term memory is more important because you're not going to be studying like you do now when you're a doctor. So you need to have a lot of it stored in your neocortex, because that's where the long-term memory is stored. And the short-term memories are processed in hippocampus and medial temporal lobe. Other areas of the brain are also involved in memory storage. Mammillary bodies, amygdala. Mammillary bodies can be damaged in chronic alcoholics, so we'll cover that in a different episode, I guess. For now, just remember guys, alcohol damages your mammillary bodies, which affects your long-term memory. And amygdala has emotionally charged memories. So if you are an emotional person, you can associate the stuff you learn with your emotions, and that may help with your learning process. So now that you learned about the types of memory and which parts of the brain each type of memory is stored, and the next part is about how this memory is stored and how you recall it. And I think I will cover more of this in the next episode. I have to leave some cliffhangers for the next episode as well. And make sure you subscribe to my podcast if you haven't already. I will have a link in the description. You can go there and enter your email simply and get this podcast delivered right into your inbox every week. And make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, 𝗦𝗽liche 𝘁𝗶𝗳𝘆. And if you want to support me, please check out my Instagram, my Facebook, and my Twitter. I will include all the links in the description. And that's it for today's podcast. And I wish you all the best in your studies. 𝗦𝗽𝗁 out.
Net motivation.